All right, everyone, we have more Ebola-related news. Again, something that until recently every lamestream outlet wouldn't talk about. Oh, it's just people over on another continent dying of a tropical disease. So, it's it's a slow news day for them. But for those of us who maybe know a little bit more about, viruses being able to mutate, I guess we're more concerned than they are. Another aid center, another Ebola ward in Butembo has been attacked. This is the second time it's happened recently, and it happened before. Now, the first time it happened, none of the people actually had Ebola. It's an Ebola treatment center. They were all maybe they had flu-like symptoms. It turned out they were all negative, so it's like everyone breathes a sigh of relief. This time, at least 4 of the people who escaped have Ebola, and others may have it, were tested, and they don't have results, I guess. So there are at least 4 people who have Ebola wandering around in Butembo right now. Yeah, that's not going to cause another outbreak in, the next couple of weeks. It's not going to cause any problems whatsoever. When people start coughing, at this point, they probably shoot themselves in the head, figuring it's better than the alternative. This is a big problem, and it's one, again, the world does not take seriously enough. Ebola has shown a readiness to mutate. In the last outbreak, the reason that 20,000 people were infected and died is because it mutated. They only found out about this after the fact, but non-medicated individuals looked at the somewhat exponential growth of its, burning through the population until thankfully another mutant destroyed the first by inoculating people asymptomatically. They looked at that and said, well, I don't think this is acting like Ebola usually acts. Usually it's very low infectious. Like, even if you get the fluids on you, there's maybe a 10% chance you get Ebola. It's not actually that easily to spread. This variant was much more easily spread. Similar death rate. I think the death rate was actually slightly lower, but it's much more able to spread. If that happens, and it can happen anytime someone's infected, then you have a bigger problem. You don't have the problem of some hundreds are dead or 1,000 dead. You have a problem of 10,000, maybe 100,000 dead. And the more cases you get, the more likely you get further mutations. Now, in the West African epidemic 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, I think, you had an asymptomatic variant come out, and people were essentially being vaccinated against it by nature. Wonderful. It helped to slow the spread of it down to below exponential levels. Aid workers were able to come in and finally snuff it out. Will that happen in the Congo? Who knows? It could break containment. It could hit the border with any of these other nearby states. You have a civil war in the area that's preventing the deployment of medicine, and it's only experimental anyway. The serums and vaccines they develop, they don't even know if they work. They've got at least one serum that they think is halfway effective, but even then you're got a 40% chance of dying. It's like, oh, we can save 1 out of every 5 people. They're still symptomatic. They're still potentially infect others. And then when people get angry for political reasons and burn down the Ebola ward and send bleeding patients flying into the streets, those people, they get found dead in the gutter by their neighbors or something, and they don't realize they have Ebola. Like, oh, I wondered where he went. I guess we have to bury the motherfucker. And then 10 people get infected. Not a great time. Even the weird side of YouTube barely talks about this. Like, they've forgotten all about the fact that there's Ebola going on right now. Don't you think that by now, considering the relatively lower number of cases, after some months they should have been able to snuff it out? But it's a civil war zone. You've got secondary outbreaks now. Well, there's certainly a lot of malaria. You've got cholera in the area anyway. All of these problems, and now you have political upheaval added to it. An area that's already under civil war with political upheaval and secondary epidemics too. It's a powder keg, honestly. All you need is for order to break down in a place like Butembo, for people to flee around. Some of them have Ebola. All of a sudden, you have 1,000 new cases in a week or something. That could happen. In a couple weeks, because of this Ebola ward being attacked and these symptomatic infectious individuals fleeing, and they don't know, I guess, what are they going to do? Go out with butterfly nets to catch them or something? Because of that fact, potentially hundreds of people in the last 24 hours have come into contact and been infected. That's a major outbreak waiting to happen in a fairly large metropolitan area that does have a link up travel-wise and trade-wise to even larger metropolitan areas that aren't that far away. It's near several national borders. It's near a more substantial, Butembo is like 400,000 or 500,000 people. There's a city nearby, I can't remember the name for the life of me, has over 1 million. And has a major airport and everything else that you could possibly need for trade and travel. Yeah, that would be a disaster. Meanwhile, the MSM is too focused on bullshit. They're like, oh, It's a slow news day over in Africa. Nothing happened. Some day, the Gabon, revolutionary coup attempt or something like that. They'll talk about that. It's like a nation. Nobody over here can even fucking find it on a map. But meanwhile, you got hundreds of people dying of Ebola. Nobody cares. I think it's a big problem. People need to be more educated about disease. Don't freak out, but quarantine is a good thing. Get vaccinated. I know that was a big issue for a lot of people. It was very, very funny. Jesus. So I wouldn't be surprised if Butembo ends up basically not having a localized economy for a while because people will be terrified. And again, you've got populations of people that, by and large, they're not medical experts or anything. So, that, in some cases, you have these communities, they think of disease still in a spiritual sense, like it's caused by a miasmus or something. And it's not widely understood the method of transmission, the method of prevention. Here's, what you should do if you start showing symptoms. Don't panic and run off into the woods or something. That's, by and large, that's not a facet of some of these enclaves of areas within sub-Saharan Africa, with the exception of nations' capitals, and often not even the whole capital or some of the larger cities. Like you'd think of Nigeria, like Lagos or something like that. Generally speaking, fairly standard, westernized infrastructures there. It's also rapidly expanding, but a place like Butembo, it's like dirt roads, and not necessarily access to clean water and a ready food supply. Better, by the way, if you look at Butembo on the ground, there's video of it on YouTube. It looks better than a lot of areas in sub-Saharan Africa, like considerably cleaner and more advanced. It looks relatively safe and stable, but it doesn't necessarily stay that way if hundreds of people start dying of Ebola. And when you got four or at least four people that are necessarily infected, possibly several others there that hadn't been tested or whatever, that's a recipe for disaster. It's like any containment that they had in Butembo up until now is gone, as of this particular center being burned to the ground. That's about all. Peace out.